right, guys, thank you for that. We've got Thomas, of course, joining me today to talk about loaded and rolling, putting on a different hat this morning. Now your host hat is on. Let's dig into this because we're talking about politics and autonomy, two things that go hand in hand. You can't have autonomous vehicles without getting into the politics of things.
Getting in the weeds, and it was really fun. Had a conversation with Wiley Deck at Plus. He does their government affairs and heads that up. And it's cool because Wiley also was in Congress for 20 years. So he's been on subcommittees for transportation and infrastructure. So he understands how D.C., how things get worked in the legislative process. And it was really interesting because it feels like, from my conversation with him, that a lot of these autonomous makers are like level 4. It can do everything. It doesn't need people. I'm a strong, independent, autonomous vehicle. But Plus is taking a different approach, which is having the level 4 fundamentals, but it's using it a level 2 driver assist. And so this is really cool because when we're talking about how this will be deployed, how the regulatory environment is going to be impacted by it, right now, a lot of these people are making them to run, and currently Plus is more of a crawl, walk, run, because we see this develop, because there's a lot of unknowns.
Absolutely, and I think that this is so great. So I've had the pleasure of meeting Wiley in person a couple times, talking to him about this. And the fascinating thing about the approach that Plus is taking, as we mentioned, is the fact that there is sometimes a lot of disconnect between these companies who are saying, okay, we want to do this, and the government saying, okay, hold up, wait, we can't let you do this yet. But having someone like Wiley, who is also a deputy administrator at FMCSA, along with his time in Congress, now gives them that perspective to really say, okay, we understand the steps that we have to take a little bit more. When we're looking at some of those steps, you mentioned the crawl, the walk, the run approach. Where does Plus kind of sit right now in what they're doing, and how receptive is the government to seeing them make these smaller steps?
Well, I think if we look at the crawl phase, that's the current AOBR, automatic braking stuff that we see equipped in OEMs. That's definitely. Walk phase is like your Plus systems, your level 2 modified forms of driver assist. We see like Tesla has their own versions of assisting. You still need somebody in the seat. And then the run phase being fully autonomous, start date TBD, we don't know. But I think that when we talk about lobbying and how things are made, lobbying is informative first. People will think, well, I don't like that my issue is not getting the attention. Yes, it is not, because you failed to properly inform them, and if you have the right information and presentation, you can get more. Look at the AARP. They want to have old people sensors now. I promise you that will probably go through, because the AARP they punch above their weight in terms of lobbying
I think
power.
they just want to have people sensors, not specifically old people sensors.
Yes, as well as people with disabilities, various shapes, colors, and sizes. They want to make sure, because the truck's high off the ground.
Yeah, it's hard to see.
It is hard to see. So these are examples of where we're going to see this move in. But what I thought was most fascinating was, will anything get passed this year? This is one of the questions I asked him. I was like, re-election is coming up. What happens if you're trying to lobby? Because you have to imagine that Congress is going to have to get reelected every 4 years. And he said that we have really until October if we want to. The job is, it's like Schoolhouse Rock, where you want to get put on a bill and tacked on. I did that with Model UN one time. I tried to free Tibet, and I crashed one of the resolutions in Chicago with the Tibetan Liberation Front. So it does work from a parliamentary procedure and legislative standpoint. But on the flip side, if you're an autonomous truck maker, you're trying to do stuff, you do want to get put on one of these bills, because maybe there's something on there that gives you research funding, grants, it gives you an exception. So that's the play. The problem is we have until October, and then campaign season begins. Everybody's going out. The goal is to try to get reelected if you want to be reelected. So the window is closing. Expectations right now in terms of will anything meaningful get through? It's a toss-up. But the goal is now, here's what's fascinating. As soon as elections finish, there's going to be a new group of Congress people and staffers and support staff. And so you almost have your sandcastle that you built up with all this information. And an election comes and kicks it down, and you have to start all over again to explain to these individuals, hey, this is why this is important. Because a lot of Congress people don't know about autonomous trucking or anything in the supply chain. And so when we hear folks on social media get frustrated as to why their stuff isn't going, part of it is because I mean, it's almost like you're wiping the slate clean. You have to reinform everyone.
So when you're talking to a lot of these legislators or former legislators who now work in private industry, they have that same kind of approach because they know how it works, right? Founding fathers set up this 4-year election cycle. I'm going to step on my soapbox here for a little bit. But the way that it happens is you have that November election and then you go into holidays. So by the time that they reconvene in January, you've lost about a month and a half of your year, right? Okay, it takes everybody about a month and a half to get up to speed. It's the spring. You've got this 9-month to 14-month-ish window to get some real progress made when your newly elected representatives understand this lobbying perspective. They're familiar in Congress. They get their feet under them, right? And then, of course, you have midterm elections. It rolls around,
Yep.
right? About a year and a half into that legislative process. Every 2 years, we elect some new representatives. The same thing happens. They have this cycle, they get their feet under them, and then it's the general election. So as you mentioned, it's very difficult for things to get done, and we know that nothing moves quickly in government, but a lot of things move quickly in the transportation space, right? We see these tech adoptions, we see these releases. How do they find that balance between, as you mentioned, lobbying and making people understand, maybe on a slowed or even compressed timeline?
Well, it's never ending is the first part. It's always be informing, ABI.
ABI, always be informing.
Thomas's lobbying steps 101, always be informing. And why you have to do that is because you have to do that because as soon as that sprint comes, when that legislation window is good, that's when we have to hit the gas. Get me on House Bill AB 51-451 subsection 2.
Not AB 5.
Yeah, or that's the thought process is I have to get added onto something. So hurry up and wait is the FMCSA's goal right now. We want to collect information. We have some tentative rulemaking. We're getting public comments. Because the technology is so new, the FMCSA and stuff, they're working on things right now like meal breaks. They want to do a detention study. So we are seeing some movements, but they have to pick and choose. They don't have all the resources as a larger government bureaucracy does. So we're going to continue to see partnerships and information in the space, but what'll happen is the technology will get there and then policy will catch up like a rubber banding effect. And the fascinating thing is right now, also moving into the presidential elections, is there's a lot of confusion because depending upon if an incumbent stays or another one comes in, will that further disrupt the agencies? Will we have a new agency person in charge? Will we have new policies in place? So this is a weird time where right after October, everyone's going to hunker down and wait for the election storm to pass, and then we're going to pick up the pieces and say, okay, what's the policy going to be right now? Because we do have elected officials in charge of agencies, but you never know who's going to be in it. Will they keep the same person, or are they going to try to elect somebody else and replace it?
Definitely one of the most challenging things, and makes me very glad that we talk freight and not politics all the time.
It would be exhausting to see how the sausage is made on Capitol Hill. People think it's a lot more exciting. Wiley had one of the best parts in the last interview I had. He said, look, you do have some Congress people who do like the TV in the limelight. He's like, in some of these transportation committees and other stuff, you just show up, you go to work, you're working on fixing bridges, you try to spend this money, but at the same time, it's not very glamorous. So our expectations of House of Cards is completely wrong. It's more like watching C-SPAN, at least in the transportation space. So thankfully for us, it's a lot more fun to report on.
Hey, but you know what's a really exciting show to watch is Loaded and Rolling, and you can find that on Tuesday afternoons right here on FreightWaves TV, 1 o'clock Eastern, and head on over to freightwaves.com/newsletters. Join that Loaded and Rolling community as well to get more lovely tidbits from the one and only Thomas Wasson. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more FreightWaves Now right after this.